Welcome one and all to this Cinema 4D tutorial hosted by myself, Akers HD. It feels so good to say that. I'm sorry for being away for so long, but I'm back with a bang, and in today's Cinema 4D video tutorial we're going to be taking a look on how to model this Apple iMac from scratch in Cinema 4D. So this is going to be a maybe 3 to 4 part video. So in the first maybe 1 or 2 videos we're going to be modelling it from scratch in Cinema 4D, and then the next video we're going to be texturing it and also maybe lighting, and then the next video we're going to be rendering and looking at render settings, and then maybe possibly we're going to take it into Photoshop and maybe create a little advertisement. So this is a really intense training tutorial, but it is going to be worth it, because if you want to have a look at some of the final renders, what you can do is come over to the brand new Facebook page of Akers. So you can come over and like the brand new Akers Facebook page. So I've opened up a brand new one so I can connect with you guys, and if you have any questions, whether that be about a tutorial or maybe something on your own project, you can come over here and ask a question, post on a timeline, and hopefully there might be some other people that can help you if I can't help you as well. So if you want to take a look at the final renders of what we're going to be creating today, come over to the Facebook page, which will be, the link will be in the description. And as you can see, this was built from scratch in Cinema 4D, all textured and lit by myself and rendered using the physical render engine in Cinema 4D R13 Studio. So that's what I'm going to be working with today, is Cinema 4D R13 Studio. So just to cover that from the start, just so we don't get any questions in the comment section below. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first what we're going to do, we're going to set up the scene and do a little bit of preparation before we start to get everything set up. So first off, what you're going to notice is my Cinema 4D layout, and in the description below there will be a download link for a resource pack, and in this resource pack contains some images and some logos that we're going to be using in today's tutorial. So what you can do, you download this resource pack, and in it contains my Cinema 4D layout. So if you want to follow along with my layout, you can do, and I'll show you how to upload that now. All you have to do is open up Cinema 4D, come over to Window, and then we want Customization, Layout, and you want to load layout, and then navigate to the iMac resource pack, and then select the Akers Cinema 4D layout, and that will load up the layout that I'm using today. So once you've done that, all that's left to do is, if we come on to our perspective and we change our perspective, and we can see our right, front and top perspective, what I'm going to do is come on to the right perspective, and if you come up to options, configure, or the shortcut to that is Shift V. So if we hit Shift V, that's going to bring up the configuration, and we have display, filter, view, back, HUD and stereoscopic. And if we select back and we select image, and if you come over to your resource pack and select the iMac model.png and then hit open, what that's going to do, that's going to put an image on the back of our perspective. And if we increase the X size to 1000, and then we increase the transparency to around 75, now what we've got is a guide and a template to work with. And then if we come out of our right perspective and come into our front perspective, what we can do is, if we select the image where we loaded the image and we just copy that, so right click, copy, and then come on to our front perspective and then hit Shift V again, and then come over to back image, and we can just paste that location, and you can see we get the nice guide to work from. And then once again we're going to change X size to 1000, and the transparency to 75. So there we go. Now we've got a nice image to be working from. And first off, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into our front perspective and then come on to options. No, not options, we want filter, and then you're going to see grid, and we want to uncheck grid. Now this is just a personal preference, but I prefer to work without a grid just for the moment. Okay, and now what we're going to do, we're going to come up to File and Save As. And then what we're going to do, we're going to make a new folder, and this new folder is going to be called iMac C4D. And then what we're going to do, we're going to name this iMac _001. And then in the future, what we can do is, instead of having to save all the time, we just come up to save incremental. And as you can see at the top, that's now saved as iMac 002. So if we come over to the folder in which we save that, you can see that now there's two different versions, and this is really good if you want to go back and change something you're going to have. If you save incrementally often, you're going to have loads of different versions throughout the model. So with all that done, we are ready to start modeling. And first off, we want to come into our front perspective. And to start with, we're going to come up to the spline tab, and we're going to select a rectangle spline. And we're just going to center this rectangle into the center of the iMac as best as possible. And we're going to change the width and height to match the iMac. And once you've got the rectangle to the shape of the iMac, what we're going to do is select rounding and just find a nice radius that fits the corners of the iMac, so we can zoom in and make sure, yep, that's looking good. So with that rectangle, what we're going to do is come over to the right perspective. And now what we're going to do, we're going to hit R on the keyboard to rotate the rectangle spline, and you just want to try and get it the same angle as the iMac. And then what we're going to do, we're going to move this spline forward to the front of the iMac like so. And we're going to call this rectangle 1. And then we're going to hit Command C, Command V, Control C, Control V if you're on a Windows computer. I'm going to rename this to rectangle 2. And we're going to drop that rectangle back to create some thickness to the iMac. And if we come into our 3D perspective mode now, you can see we have two splines. And if we come up to our NURBS tab and then select Loft NURBS, and then we make the two rectangles a child of the Loft NURBS by dragging and dropping them onto the NURBS tab, you can see what that does. That creates a skin around the two rectangle splines. And what we need to do now is add a little bit of thickness and depth to the back of the iMac, because you can see it bevels out on the back. So to do that, all we have to do is, what I'm going to do is just shut off the Loft NURBS just for now, and I'm going to copy and paste rectangle 2, and we'll call this rectangle 3. And what we're going to do, we're just going to move that rectangle forward just a tiny little bit, and then we're going to copy and paste rectangle 2 again, Control C, Control V, and then we're going to hit T on the keyboard and scale that right down And if we come over to our right perspective and hit E on the keyboard, that's going to come over to the move tool, and we drag that fourth rectangle spline out. I'm just going to rename that to rectangle 4. So you drag that rectangle 4 out just so it matches up with the iMac there. And then if we put these two spline objects into the loft NURBS and then uncheck the loft NURBS, what you can see is we get a really nice sort of subtle beveled edge effect that gives the iMac back some depth. And the reason for the third rectangle spline is because if I delete this, if I just shut off the third rectangle, you can see that it's a really smooth bevel, and on the iMac it's a pretty hard beveled edge. So with that third rectangle, just move forward out a little bit. What that does, that gives it a nice hard beveled edge like so. And if we select the loft NURBS and come over to the attributes of the loft NURBS, what we can do, we can increase some of the subdivisions. So the mesh subdivisions U, you can see we start to increase that to maybe 200, 150, 200. And you can see that gives us really nice rounded corners, like so. And the mesh division V, we can increase that to maybe 5. We don't need that to be too big. And then we can, there's some other options like organic form, loop, and different things, and there's some, you can add caps and fillets and etc. But that's all we're going to be doing with the loft NURBS just for now. And with that done, what you want to do is come up to File and Save Incremental. So now with the main body done, what we're going to do is rename the loft NURBS to iMac body, and then we're ready to start working on the base. So if we come into our right perspective, and what I'm going to do is, if we come over to the Layers tab, so if you've downloaded my layout and you're using the layout, it will be right here with Layers. If not, you can come up to Window and then Layer Manager, and that will bring up the Layer Manager. And then within the layers, we're going to right click, add a new layer, and then change this to whatever colour you want. And then we're going to rename this iMac body, and then we're going to drag that layer onto the iMac body loft NURBS. And now what that allows us to do is either solo it, so it's the only thing that we can see in the screen, or we can hide just that section. So I'm just going to hide the iMac body for now, and then come into our right perspective, and we're going to start with a primitive cube. And what we want to do, we just want to scale, start to scale this down, and you can see we have the top perspective at the top right hand corner, and this will be pretty useful if it was a back perspective. So all we have to do is come over to the cameras and select, instead of top, select back, and that's going to give us a back view. And then if we hit Shift V, once again that's going to bring up the configuration. And then if we just locate to the iMac model.png in the resource pack again, and then we change XY to 1000 and the transparency to 75. And I'm just going to come over to our layers and unhide the iMac body. What we can do, come over to our back perspective, hit Shift V, and what you can do is change the X and Y offset. So we're just going to increase the X offset just so it lines up, And then we can come over to our layers tab and hide the iMac body again. And now what we can do, we can start to position this cube and try and make the size fit the base as best as possible. And we're just going to be increasing the X and Y sizes. So you want the Y value to be pretty high. And then what we're going to do, we're going to rotate it just so it's at the same angle as the base stand and the same thickness. And this is just a case of lining it up with the background picture. So you want to scale and try and scale it as best as possible, but we are going to be using bender deformers and taper deformers to deform this cube to make it line up with the base even more. And if we come over to our 3D perspective, what we're going to do, we're going to start adding some segments and subdivisions to this cube. So the X segments we want to be 4. Now that's very specific, that is. We need 4, and I'll show you that in a little while, because we're going to be dropping it into our hyperNURBS object. We need 4 segments, 4 subdivisions along the X-axis. And for the Y subdivisions, we want this to be, once again, because we're going to be dropping it into a hyperNURBS object, we don't need that many, so maybe not even that, maybe 5, 6. We'll do 8 just to be safe. Now you're going to see when we start to bend and deform this, it's going to look really jagged, but that's because we haven't put it into a hyperNURBS object yet, and we'll get to that later. So we'll just try 10 segments for now. We can always decrease or increase if we need to. And the segments along the Z-axis we want to increase to maybe 5. So what you should have now is a cube that looks a little something like this. And you just want to double check that it's all lined up as best as possible. And now what we're ready to do is start using deformers to bend and taper this into position. So we just want to come up to File and hit Save Incremental. Okay, so now we're ready to start bending and deforming this cube. So to do that, what we're going to do is come up to the Deform tab, and we're going to select a Bend Deformer. And then we're going to come into our 3D perspective view. And then you want to select the bend and come over to the attributes, and you just want to increase the strength just to see which way the deformer is going. So we can see it's bending that way, so we need to rotate it round like so. And if we come on to our right perspective, you can see a bit more clearly. And then once we know which way the deformer is going, we can set the strength back down to 0. And then what we're going to do is just scale this bend deformer down by decreasing the size on the X and Y value. So you can do this in the back perspective and the front perspective and the right perspective as well, just to try and make sure that you've got it all lined up nice and well. So this is just a case of lining it up to the best of your ability. And then we're going to come into our right perspective, and then we're just going to rotate it just to match the same angle as the cube, and just keep scaling it down to try and get it as close as possible to fit the cube. So that's looking pretty good at the moment. And then what we're going to do, we're going to make the bend deformer a child of the cube by dragging and drop it onto the cube. And now what we can do is turn up the strength, and you're going to see that we start to get that nice bend. Now, like I said earlier, it's going to look pretty jagged. That's because we haven't put it into a HyperNurbs object yet. And just to show you what that looks like, if we come up to our NURBS tab and select HyperNurbs, and then make the cube a child of the HyperNurbs object by dragging and drop it onto it, you can see we get a really nice smooth bend. But I'm just going to shut off the HyperNurbs just for now, just so we don't get confused. So with that bend deformer done, we're ready to start bending the bottom of the base. So once again, come up to your Deformers tab, select Bend, and once again we're just going to see which way this is bending. Just increase the strength just a little bit. I'm going to need to rotate this round. And we're also going to scale this down. And then once again, try and position it as best as possible. Okay, and if we just turn the strength down to 0, and then make this bend deformer a child of the cube again, but make sure it's below the first bend deformer that we used. And then increase the strength, and you're going to see that we have this the wrong way round. We just want to rotate that 180 degrees, just so now that when we bend it, instead of going that way, it's going the right way. Might need just to increase the size a little bit. And now if we drop a HyperNurbs object onto it by selecting the NURBS tab, HyperNurbs, and then dragging and drop it onto the HyperNurbs. Now what we can do is start to reposition this bend deformer. Maybe turn the strength down a little bit. We're going to need to turn the strength up just a tiny bit. And then if we go back into our 3D perspective mode, you can see we have a nice looking base. And also with the HyperNurbs object, what you can do is come into the attributes and actually increase the subdivisions. So if we want to increase some more subdivisions, we can do. But bear in mind that will slow down the viewport. So we're just going to keep it at 2 and 3 at the moment. And if we come back into our right perspective, and we're just going to double check that we've got all these bend deformers lined up as best as possible. And if we select the cube, what we're going to do is decrease the size on the Y value. And I'm just going to drag and drop these bend deformers out of the cube just a little bit. And then select the cube and just reposition it. And then drag and drop the deformers back onto it. And this is just a case of trying to do it by eye as best as possible. And I'm just going to move the cube up a little bit. So there we go, that's looking pretty good at the moment. We can always come back and do some final touches to it, and we just want to hit File, Save Incremental. Okay, now we're ready to add the taper deformer. So once again, come up to your deformer tab and select taper, and we're just going to increase the strength just a little bit, just so we know what we're doing. And first off, you want to change the mode from limited to within box, and then we want to scale this down just to try and fit the top bit of the base. We also may need to rotate it, but we might do that at a later stage. So you want to come into all four of your perspectives and just make sure that you've got everything lined up, just so that this taper is covering the entire base. And we're going to make the taper deformer a child of the cube. And you can see that because we're using the mode within box, what we're going to need to do is make sure that the entire base is inside of the taper object, and then come into your back perspective and just try and make sure that everything's lined up as best as possible. Make sure everything's centered up. So you can see that's looking pretty good at the moment. And you can see that we may need to come back to our original bend deformer and just increase and play around and start to move just the other deformers, just to make sure that everything's in line. So you can see we're really starting to get there with the base now. And that's looking pretty good at the moment. And once again, we're going to come up to File and hit Save Incremental. With that done, what I'm going to do is just hide these deformers by selecting the traffic lights. And if you hold down Option or Alt on your computer and double click, that's going to turn both the traffic lights red to hide the deformers. And now what we're ready to do is I'm going to uncheck these deformers and I'm going to uncheck the hyperNURBS object, and then we're going to select the cube and hit C on the keyboard. That's going to make it editable. And then what we're going to do is come into point mode by selecting this button here, and with point mode selected you want to select live selection and make sure that only select visual elements is checked within the attributes. And then we want to come to the bottom of the cube and select all these points here. And then if we hit E on the keyboard to get back to our move tool, or select this button here, and then we're just going to move these points down like so. And the reason for that is, if we turn on the hyperNURBS object now, you can see we get a nice rounded radius on the bottom. And then if we open up the cube and turn on the deformers again, you can see now we have a nice rounded edge. And if we just have a look at the background, you can see, if we have a look on the right view, you can see we have this nice circular edge, and that's what we've got now. So with that done, what I'm going to do is rename the hyperNURBS object to iMac base. And then if we come into our layer browser again, and we're going to make a new layer, and make this one whatever colour you wish. I'm going to call this iMac base, and then drag and drop the iMac base layer onto the iMac base hyperNURBS object. And now what we can do, we can uncheck the iMac body so we can see it. And here's what we have so far. It's looking pretty good, we're getting there. And once we've done that, you just want to select File, Save Incremental. So I just want to edit the iMac base a little bit. So I'm just going to hide the body and then come over to the base. If we just have a look on the right perspective, you can see that on the rounded corners it gets a little bit wider as it comes to the bottom of the base with the rounded corners. So to do that, we're going to come over to our 3D perspective and uncheck the hyperNURBS objects, select the cube, click anywhere in the viewport to deselect the points that we used earlier, and you want to come into your live selection and double check that only select visual elements is on, and we want to select the first and second subdivision rows on both sides, and we're also going to select these ones down here too on the corner. And then what we're going to do is hit T on the keyboard, and we're going to scale these up just a tiny little bit, and then hit spacebar to get back to our live selection. And then while holding Control or Command down, we're just going to deselect these top points, and then hit T on the keyboard again, and we're just going to increase the size on the x-axis slightly, and then once again hit spacebar, hold down Command or Control if you're on Windows, and we're going to deselect these points on both sides, and then hit T on the keyboard and increase these on the x-axis just a tiny little bit. And if you hit E on the keyboard just to get back to your move tool, and we turn back on the hyperNURBS object, you can see now that the base gets a little bit wider around the rounded corners. So that's good, that's exactly what we're after. And we come over to our layers and turn on the iMac body. And then come up to File, Save Incremental. Now that we've done that, there's just a few more things that I want to do on the iMac body, which is if we select the iMac body and then come over to caps and change the type from triangles to n-gons, you can see that gets rid of all those unnecessary lines on the front. And then what I want to do is just swing around the back and select our fourth rectangle and just increase the radius of the rounding like so. And then we just want to hit T on the keyboard and we're just going to scale this. Probably be easier if you select the fourth rectangle spline and we start to change the height and width. And there we go, that's pretty much this section done for now. So we've got the iMac body and the iMac base. In the next video, what we're going to be doing is creating all the USB ports and the air vents and the CD slot and all that good stuff. So tune in to the next video to finish off this iMac. So thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.